Some years ago, I had the opportunity to be a tour guide in St. Augustine, Florida, our nation's oldest city. And on that tour, I told ghost stories. And there's one that is a personal favorite, and I'd like to share it with you now. It is about Bishop Verot. Bishop Jean-Pierre Augustin Mercier Verot was born in France in 1805. At the age of 23, he became a priest, and a few years later, he came to America to preach and to teach, and he landed in Baltimore, Maryland, where he did those things very well for the next 28 years. People in Baltimore said that he was a very nice man who commanded one's attention. After 28 years, he was elevated by the Catholic Church to the role of bishop and sent south to Florida, where he became the Vicar Apostolic of Florida, the very first bishop of the Diocese of St. Augustine. And he was beloved. During the Civil War, he ministered both to Confederates and to Union soldiers. And when the war ended, during construction, he was almost single-handedly responsible for the construction and operation of 29 free public schools, specially built for the purpose of educating the children of freed slaves and anyone too poor to afford to send their kids to school. He was a hero to those people, thousands of them, because those schools helped those people's lives be much, much better. In June of 1876, Bishop Verot died, and the church leadership in the Diocese of St. Augustine wanted to hold a big service to honor him and his service. And as word got out up and down the eastern seaboard that the bishop had passed away and that there was going to be this big service, people communicated by the dozen back to the church leadership to ask them to postpone the service just long enough for these folks to travel south or north or east to St. Augustine so that they could pay their respects to the bishop. Leadership agreed, but they had a problem. The body of the bishop in June in Florida in 1876. No freezers, no refrigeration. They weren't sure how they were going to keep his body preserved for a couple of weeks until the funeral. So they came up with an idea. They dug a big hole in the ground in the churchyard. They put the bishop's body in the bottom of it, and they covered it up with ice and with Spanish moss, which worked really well for about a day and a half. Then, as I used to tell folks when I would tell the story, they had a soggy dead bishop and a whole lot of holy water. Idea number 2, they hired the local blacksmith to fashion a steel coffin with a glass lid so they could put the bishop's body inside, seal it up so that it wouldn't smell, and people could still see his face to come and pay their respects. So the blacksmith did that, and the casket was very successful. They put the bishop's body in there, sealed it up with the glass lid, and when it came time for the service, they propped the casket up at the front of the church so people could come in and pay their respects. And they did by the hundred. And when it came time for the service, the place just got more and more packed. And the people in the first 20 or 30 rows, history says, reported hearing these odd noises, these hisses and these pops and these strange noises coming from the front of the church. And then someone noticed that the glass lid on the coffin was starting to bow out a little bit. You see, when that casket was sealed up, there wasn't any way for the expanding gases coming out of the deceased body to escape, except for that glass lid. And it bowed and bowed and bowed until finally, in front of a packed house in the church, kaboom! The lid exploded. Everybody looked up, jaws agape. And what landed on them were pieces of the bishop's body. Yeah, and it freaked them out. So everybody ran out of the church. The leadership had a really hard time getting somebody to go back in that church and gather up the pieces of the bishop's body so they could give him a proper burial. And they did in a small container in the Talamato Cemetery, the only Catholic cemetery at the time in St. Augustine. And he stayed there for 100 years. In 1976, the bishop of the Diocese of Florida had heard this legend for his whole life, and he wanted to know whether or not it was true. So he had someone in the church leadership go with him, and they dug up this very small container that held the bishop's body. When they opened it up, what they found inside were fresh, warm, pink pieces of the bishop's body. Yeah, it really freaked him out. So he put it in a brand new steel container inside a cement vault, and they buried him underneath a monument with his head and shoulders bust in the middle of the Talamato Cemetery, where, to the best of my knowledge, today and forevermore, Bishop Verot will rest in pieces.